let me just give you a few kind of conclusions and what does all this mean for developing an economic ecosystem, as I call it. And then we'll get into some discussion items and some Q&A perhaps first. First, communities need to look objectively into their long-run situation. You have to think strategically about the future. You can't analyze the economy like you would look outside for the weather. You have to have a critical detachment to look at how you're doing on a long-term evolving basis. You need to have a long-range shared vision to be successful. There needs to be a strategic blueprint that guides the tactical implementation efforts. It's not that you have a blueprint that says company XYZ needs to do this. In some cases, that's the truth. And it constantly needs to be updated, but without a plan, a blueprint, you don't have a cohesive vision of where you're headed, and individual communities can head their own direction. To some extent, they have to, but it needs to be part of a broader plan. Also, awarding incentives needs to be done just not on the number of jobs that are created, but the wages associated with those jobs. All jobs are not created equal. They have different wages associated with them and higher multiplier effects for the entire community. Also, a number of communities that have been successful in getting on the larger playing stage have targeted what I call tech anchor firms. So what's that accomplish? Well, it raises the outside world's awareness to what you're doing. So whether that's an HP, an Intel, or Google, if they're looking at your community, or it could be a Siemens, it could be international firms, others will take a look at your community, your region as well. So it's really about the public and private institutions that play such a role in how those assets are utilized and the social capital within a region. So you have a cluster of independent linked firms, organizations, universities, technical colleges that really provide a broader base of assets for a region than any individual community can by themselves. It's these networks and institutions that really are important to promote economic growth over the long term. And I talked a lot about commercialization of R&D. Obviously, you could have a whole separate course on that and how you accomplish that. But it's not just about having the research and development capacities. There are a number of states, a number of communities that have very strong R&D assets, but they're not engaged with the local private sector, whether they're at a national lab, whatever the situation may be, a university that did not have a culture that was very accepting of commercialization, that saw working with the private sector as somehow making the academic purity of their scientific discoveries in question. Those are the communities that have not harnessed those assets for economic growth. So universities and other types of research institutions are really incubators for new ideas, and they must be spun out into the local community. One of the challenges that your region faces, in addition to many others, is access to venture capital or private equity. Keep in mind that Silicon Valley, one region, is responsible for 50% of all venture capital investments in the country. And then when you include overall California, it gets up to almost 58%. You include Boston, you're at about 65%, almost 70%. And so the point I'm making is that access to venture capital is important, but don't think of it just in terms of venture capital. It's angel investing, it's private equity that we're really talking about, because venture capitalists don't invest in startup companies. They invest in proven technologies to get them to the next level. So the best leading indicator for whether or not your community, for your region, is developing an entrepreneurial infrastructure is whether or not you have an active angel investor pool developing. That's absolutely critical as a leading indicator. And you need to foster the entrepreneurial infrastructure. Once again, key distinguishing feature of how well communities are doing over the long term look at their rate of entrepreneurship, and especially in the technology areas, and you'll find out how they're doing. And improvements in human capital must be broad-based. So you're not creating the pool of human capital that's college eligible if you're not getting the kids in K through 12. Recent studies show, and our sister organization, the Milken, excuse me, the Milken Family Foundation, their education research group, has shown that if you don't get kids by the 4th grade or the 5th grade interested in science, technology, and engineering, the odds are very low that you ever will. I've been blessed, and both of my kids went to an elementary school called the Flory Academy of Science and Technology, where the entire curriculum from kindergarten on is based on science and technology, all the examples. They were able to, it's a NASA magnet school. They were able to talk to the space station directly. Unfortunately, Dad wasn't able to attend. I tried to, but they wouldn't let dads in, or moms for that matter. But it was really cool. So the point I'm trying to make is you have to immerse kids and get them excited about science and technology at a very early age. It can't wait till high school. You can still capture a few at early high school, but to really capture them, to make them passionate about wanting to move forward in those fields, you have to get them in elementary school. Right, so in closing, I guess what I would say in terms of my kind of keynote presentation is that recognizing that you need to diversify your economy by seeding and nurturing the industries of the 21st century based upon knowledge is a long-term commitment. It truly is that. It's not something that's going to happen next year or within 5 years, but you can make progress within 5 years. It requires a consistent, sustained investment over a period of decades. Think about the North Carolina Research Triangle. Those investments began in the 1950s. That did not happen overnight. But perhaps most importantly, you need to think strategically as you move forward, because if you don't move ahead, you simply will fall behind.